Good morning. Good morning, YouTube. Good morning, Live Me. Right now, Live Me, we're at 10. YouTube, still waiting. Still waiting. How's it going, everybody? Nick Brana's here. What's up, Nick?
Hey, I am pretty good. How about yourself, Ron?
I'm doing good, buddy. So the way it works here is once we have 30 people. What's up, Marcus? Good morning, my friend. Greetings, comrades, Marcus says. Once we have 30 people on either app is when we officially start. Sometimes LiveMe gets there first. Sometimes YouTube gets there first. But whenever we have 30 on each, that's when we start. I'm going to get over to the stream itself so I can help Pasta with the chat because you're going to be taking a lot of questions, Nick. People are stoked to see you.
Sweet.
And so you're going to be a busy man today. You're going to be a busy man. We're starting out slow. Taking a lot of and I have to mute it. So I'm going to explain. Howdy, Panderson. What's up, Karen? Good to see everybody. Thank you for being early. Pasta's back. Joe's here. That's my crew, Nick.
Oh, hey, Pasta, Joe.
So we haven't officially started yet. But we're going to start here. Oh, 26 to 25. You guys are neck and neck.
Oh, snap.
You guys are neck and freaking neck. 27 to 25. 30. YouTube got there. Welcome to Get Your News On with Ron. We are officially begun. I am here with, you know him already, but I'm going to introduce him anyway, Nick Brana. Nick Brana is the leader of Movement for a People's Party. He did the Convergence Conference in September. I hope we're doing another one, by the way, Nick. And that was the movement to draft Bernie into doing a third party. So, Nick, before you jump in here, let me give you a 411 of what to expect, because this is a different kind of show. This is Get Your News On with Ron, the world's first viewer-curated streaming news show. What that means when we have guests, they're going to give you the questions. So when you're talking, here's what I'm going to do. The people on Live Me, they can hear you, but they're not going to be able to see you. But they get the first choice on questions. The people on YouTube, they can see you and hear you. So my computer is always going to be turned up. So I'm going to make a special effort to make sure my mic is muted whenever you're talking. If you notice me looking around when you're answering a question, it's not because I'm not paying attention. It's because I'm trying to filter questions from 2 different devices. I'm trying to organize them the best I can. There's a lot going on. Does that all sound like a good time?
That sounds great.
Yeah.
This is the video version of the AMA that I did yesterday on Reddit.
You know what, man? It's similar to an AMA, and it's also similar to, it's basically, the way I like to think of it, it's like a modern day call-in show. Like, this is the modern day talk show of today.
Right. Why has nobody thought of a video call-in show up until now?
We'll all wonder. We'll all wonder. So we've had some really fun conversations about third parties. We've had some conversations about green entering. So I'm going to throw it to you first to kind of lay the base here, because you kind of lay this out better than anybody I know. Because, I mean, obviously it's the project you've taken under your wing. Why do we need a third party? Why should we go straight up third party instead of Dem entering?
Yeah, that's the big question. You know, I think that when you think about how is it that change can happen, one of the lessons that I took away from, I worked on the Bernie campaign. I'm sure most people know this, but I worked on the Bernie campaign as National Political Outreach Coordinator in that capacity. It was my job to lobby superdelegates for Bernie, and also to set up meetings with elected officials and to help plan the convention towards the end. And then that led me to Our Revolution, which I helped found and was the first electoral manager, where I helped put together the slate of candidates and a plan to support them. And so both of those experiences, along with a decade earlier in politics, working for people like Terry McAuliffe and on John Kerry's PAC, taught me that in order to that the Democratic Party is essentially not democratic enough internally to be able to take it over. And so it's kind of like talking about taking over Walmart. I mean, you know, you could have 80%, 90%, 100% of the employees of Walmart who wanted a different leadership on the board, you know, who wanted a different CEO, who wanted a different ratio of CEO to worker pay, who wanted the company to have different practices environmentally. And it wouldn't matter because it's not a democratic structure. And the Democratic Party is the same thing. It's insufficiently internally democratic to be taken over. That was one of the primary lessons that I took. And you see this everywhere, you know, and so you see it from the superdelegates, who are the ones who pick the presidential nominees. They have 30% of the vote that is required to pick towards victory for a presidential nominee. And so you get this ridiculous dynamic where a whole bunch of votes are essentially cast before the candidate has even been, before a single person has cast a vote. And every single one of them, the superdelegates, has about 10,000 votes. But you see it in many, many other places too. And so the way that the leadership is elected, DNC chair Tom Perez, the membership had no say in in what direction the party was going to go in last year when they elected a new chair.
There's a reform commission, and now they're only going to cheat a little bit.
No, well, I'm so glad
they're willing to come down on the number of super delegates, so they're only going to cheat some.
Right.
Isn't that unity? Isn't that great?
Well, and the hilarious part about this is that the Republicans did away with super delegates. So it's so undemocratic that now, I mean, super delegates are party bosses, essentially, you know, picking the candidates. And so the Democratic primary is less democratic than the Republican primary. And, you know, even if all of the Unity Reform Commission's recommendations went through, which we already know that they're not going to, but I can get to that in a sec. But even if they did, it would still be more undemocratic than the Republican Party. And they would still be able to essentially anoint candidates beforehand. And obviously the Unity Reform Commission recommendations did absolutely nothing wrong about challenging the heart of the problem. And the heart is the money in politics. And so this is exemplified by the Unity Reform Commission, the Rules and Bylaws Committee, and then the DNC, the makeup of the DNC as well. And so all of those bodies are bodies of committees of corporate lobbyists, of consultants, of neoliberals, and of people who directly participated in rigging the 2016 primary. And so how illegitimate of a process is it that committees of those people are now supposedly allowed to determine whether the political revolution gets to continue inside the Democratic Party? I mean, that is completely illegitimate, and progressives should not accept that whatsoever. And now what they're doing now, Ron, is that they've, on the Rules and Bylaws Committee, and there was almost no coverage of this. There was a ton of coverage when the Unity Reform Commission put out its recommendations to begin with, of reducing super delegates and having allowing people to sign up same-day registration as well, and then having a committee, having an ombudsman who would make sure that the party just stays accountable to its own charter and isn't partial towards a particular presidential candidate in its primaries. And then also more financial transparency. And so now in the Rules and Bylaws Committee meeting that is supposed to evaluate the Unity Reform Commission meetings, and all of this is intended to be, you know, complicated, obviously, to obfuscate it. But what the Rules and Bylaws Committee did is that they struck down financial transparency. They said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to allow even the DNC to have control over the spending because right now it's just one person, the chairman, who has, you know, financial power inside the party. And we're also not going to create an ombudsman position to ensure that we are accountable to our own bylaws that mandate impartiality for candidates. And so the only reasons that you wouldn't do things like that, you know, and that is rock bottom as an expectation. Stick to your bylaws, you know, rock bottom. And the only reason they wouldn't do something like that is they have full intention of reserving the right, being able to rig the primary again in 2020. This just clearly advertised now.
Oh no, I'm with you, and you know I like the response. I applaud her for doing the work, but I feel like you're pushing a boulder up a hill, and there's people pushing the boulder back down at you, and those people are the Democratic establishment. Now here, one of the things I'm trying to get away from, I'm trying not to use the term neoliberal as often anymore. I'm trying to get away from it. Here at the show, we've come up with a few things. Marcus has come up with cappuccino conservatives. We like that one. And that was also, and then I came up with Starbucks conservative first, but he took it a step further, I think. Also, I like to use conservatives in denial because, you know, neoliberal, even though we know that neoliberal refers to the liberalization of markets, it has nothing to do with liberal in the contemporary American sense. Sometimes a lot of people don't realize that. And nothing makes these so quote unquote liberals angrier than when you actually call them conservatives. So I like conservative in denial, cappuccino conservative, Starbucks conservatives. I'm really working on that. I wanted to catch on. Feel free to run with it yourself.
That's great. Cappuccino conservatives.
Like it?
Yeah.
Shout out to Marcus. I got to give him credit or he gets mad.
I mean, heck, all the Democrats today are Republicans.
Exactly. So, all right, we're already getting some questions lining up for you. But we got to go here first because this is something we had a long conversation about this on the show. You watched that video. Why not green enter instead?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good conversation, and everything that we're doing is really inspired by the Green Party. You know, the way that we see the Green Party is that they carried the torch, this progressive torch, populist torch, during these really dark times, you know, these really dark times, neoliberal, if you don't mind the use of that, you know, the times when, I mean, the new Democrats were coming around. I mean, the Republican Party, I mean, it was this full swing assault towards, you know, to the corporate right and towards oligarchy. And they were ahead of the curve, you know, so the Greens deserve great credit and respect for that. But at the same time, there are a number of reasons that we feel that a new party is really the route to success, and why it has the best chance of succeeding. And so to lay some of the historical groundwork, in 1852, which is the election which led the Republican Party, the abolitionist Republican Party, to finally be able to replace the Whig Party, the pro-slavery Whig Party. There had been a couple of abolitionist parties that had existed before that. The Liberty Party, the Free Soil Party. And they were kind of the analog to what I would say the Green Party is today. You know, the activists had come together, people who were abolitionists, and they were strongly opposing it in those two parties. But they weren't the ones that made the breakthrough in the end. They weren't the ones that replaced the establishment party that was holding slavery in place. They didn't replace the Whig Party. What it took, rather, was a new party that came about after that crucial election of 1852, where the Whig Party elites forced through a pro-slavery platform against the will of their voters, and that split the party, and people didn't turn out, and the opposition party ended up sweeping that election, very much like the Republicans swept in the 2016 election after the Democrats blocked Bernie Sanders and his platform. And so as a result of that, the Republican Party, what made it different from the Free Soil and the Liberty Party is that it was founded as a break inside the Whig Party. And so it pulled over resources. It pulled over elected officials. It pulled over candidates who had previously been. It pulled over, you know, staff, people who had previously worked inside the Whig Party brought them over, brought all of that professional experience, all of that experience of the knowledge of how the electoral system works, the political system, who had previously worked inside one of the establishment parties.
So that is your goal then?
That was the route, yes. That was the route of the new successful party, which was able to then replace the Whig Party. And so we think it's essential for a new party to represent a split inside an establishment party and to pull over many resources. And I think we're beginning to see that with people like Tim Canova, who, after a long time of talking to him and encouraging him to go independent, you know, he decided to do it.
So you mentioned Tim Canova. Is there anybody else that is really anxious to sign on? And one of the first questions we got, which I know you knew this question was coming, are we ever going to get Bernie?
Yeah, that's right. Tim is actually the latest in a line of people who've left the Democratic Party, and they haven't gotten as much attention. And so in Colorado and in Maine and in Massachusetts, there have been state representatives who have left the Democratic Party. And in Maine, so many of them have left, it's been like 6 or 7, that they formed an independent caucus. And the independent caucus in the state house denies the Republicans or the Democrats the majority in the state house. And that has given them great power in the state house, actually. And so it goes to show, again, how you don't need to completely replace one party or another to be able to start to wield political power as independents, you know, and as progressives, because that's begun to happen in Maine. And yes, there are other people who are interested, but I have to let some of them make their own announcements. And then also, when talking about Bernie, I hope that, you know, we could get Bernie at some point, but I don't think it's contingent upon Bernie. I think that the reason that we were so successful was not necessarily because we were just trying to draft Bernie. And, you know, right now, obviously, we're not trying to draft Bernie. We're the Movement for a People's Party. We're building it, you know, regardless of whether Bernie comes over. Because I think what's more important, and we think what's more important, is that the majority of Americans have decided that they want a major new party, that there's a record number. It's almost 2 out of 3 Americans that are calling for a major new party now. So that's a profound loss of confidence. I think that with Bernie, this and so this gets to what you discussed, Ron, on that episode, which I think was great. And the title of the episode was, you know, did Bernie sell out? And I think that that's the wrong question in a way, because I think that's analyzing this from the perspective of individuals and personalities. And I think that our analysis of politics and parties kind of needs to mature in the same way that our analysis of systemic poverty has matured, systemic racism. We understand that those things are not necessarily the consequence of kind of, you know, one bad politician or, you know, one corrupt, I don't know, member of a state house or even one corporation, you know, that is really funding the wrong politicians and that kind of thing. It's a product of a system, of a structure, and that applies to the Democratic Party too. You are very much, human beings in general are products of their environment. And so going into the Democratic Party, you have all of these institutional pressures to conform to the Democratic Party that don't exist outside of it. And, you know, so to give you some examples, the reason that I left our revolution was that the leadership of our revolution, including Bernie, had at that time decided that he wanted to take money from billionaires at our revolution. And that just weeks after the campaign had ended, a campaign that was so radically successful, built upon the premise of saying that this is paid for by Bernie Sanders, the bottom of every piece of merchandise, the bottom of every email, the bottom of every communication. That was the stamp of authenticity. was saying paid for by Bernie Sanders, not the billionaires. Well, right after that, Bernie Sanders, Jeff Weaver were interested in taking money from big donors, from billionaires at our revolution, using
Why do you think that was?
For status. What?
Why do you think that was?
I think it's because of what I'm talking about. I don't think it's because, you know, because it's like, oh, Bernie's selling out, or because, you know, Bernie doesn't have any integrity, but rather it's because Bernie went into the Democratic Party at that point. You know, he was supporting Hillary Clinton. He had made that decision a couple of months ago. And that creates all of these pressures, and it puts you in a different setting also to conform to the existing corporate structure, you know, in order to get things done in that corporate structure. You have to work within it. Another example is Keith Ellison. Keith Ellison was the first person to endorse Bernie as a member of Congress. And Keith Ellison, he's co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and he is a good progressive, you know. But here's an example of what happens again when you try to gain prominence, power, authority inside the Democratic Party. Well, when he announced his run for DNC chair, within a month he had endorsed Stephen Biddle, a billionaire real estate developer in Florida, for state party chair. Within 2 months, he had pulled back on his promise to take corporate money out of the DNC, which was a staple of his campaign. Within 3 months, he was meeting with David Brock and other very wealthy donors, including billionaires, to discuss party strategy. And so when you think, you know, even people like Bernie Sanders, even people like Keith Ellison, you know, can go into this machine as people who hold these principles so dearly, you know, and they do, progressive principles, and working to create a society that works for working people. But even they, going into this machine, really cannot just divorce themselves from their environment and from all of the pressures of that machine. There's a great quote from Dan Cantor of the Working Families Party that I think sums it up. And that is, you don't take the Democratic Party over. It takes you over. You know, and so at the same time, while people are thinking, we're going to elect a progressive here, we're going to elect a progressive there, you know, you're neglecting the history of what has happened. Progressives have been elected in the Democratic Party for many decades. They are few and far between, but they have been elected. But as soon as they enter that machine, the thing, you know, then and they begin, all of those pressures begin to be applied to them, and they find themselves in a new setting, you know, where you have to compromise principles in order to accomplish anything, you know, and you're always invariably faced with situations. For example, there's a state house, or there's a legislative body that is close in the balance between the Democrats and Republicans. Well, guess what? The Democrat who is going to determine whether it's the Democrats control that state house is a conservative blue dog Democrat, doesn't stand for anything you do, you know, but winning that chamber depends on electing that person, you know? Well, people like Keith Ellison and other progressives endorse that person. And that's how it always happens. And it always slides down. And every effort to reform the Democrats, every effort to elect progressives from a progressive perspective, always it devolves into blue no matter who. It devolves into any Democrat is better than any Republican. And we know that's not true, because it is the fact that the Democrats are not progressive. It is the fact that the Democrats have abandoned working people that has actually enabled and empowered the Republican Party to come to power. And so it's not that analysis that the Republican Party, you know, is like the greater evil and the Democrats are the lesser evil. They're a little bit worse, you know, and so we just got to keep picking the Democrats. that actually doesn't acknowledge the relationship between the two parties and the fact that the Democrats are so bad that they actually empower and enable the Republicans to come to power by not inspiring turnout, as people recognize that they don't stand for working people.
Well, they stand for nothing. I mean, it's when you have two parties that have the same owners, you know, you're going to get the same. I mean, it's one of those things. The way I see it, Republicans offer terrible ideas that only benefit the 1%. And Democrats offer pretty much no alternative. I mean, like, I love to use the example of Alabama. Here are your options, Alabama. A person who's going to do nothing for you, or a pedophile. So you get to go to the poll, and people showed up because their option was prevent a pedophile. That was the options they were given in the richest country in the world, in a country that's supposed to be the leading democratic experiment on the planet. Those are your choices. Not a pedophile or pedophile. Choose, and if you don't choose, this is all your fault.
Right. Those are the choices that the Democrats and Republicans offer. And obviously it is ludicrous, you know, that we have just two parties. There is no law of nature. There is like no divine edict that says that a democracy has to work with only two parties or in a first past the post system. You know, it is.
This is what Putin wants you to say. This is.
I am exposed.
We got a lot of questions, so let's jump into some. This is from Monkismo. Thank you so much for the super chat contribution, Monkismo. Also, Platypus. Platypus says, howdy, howdy. Thank you so much for the super chat contribution. Good to hear from you. If a progressive agenda, this is back to Monkismo, if a progressive agenda is supported by a huge majority, how does a well-funded corporate Dem win a primary?
Yeah, they win because you're not competing in a level playing field. They win because they control the rules of the institutions. And they control the rules of the primary, and it is ludicrous that that they are allowed to do that. But that is essentially. But they have reiterated their ability to do that in court last year. They said that they have zero obligation. The Democratic Party said in court, in open court, in the DNC fraud lawsuit, that they have no obligation to their voters, that they can pick their candidates in back rooms if they want. And so essentially, and they also admitted, that they are a private corporation, and so very much like my example with Walmart, they're a private corporation. They set the rules of their party. They can change them in an instant, and they often do. And in order to block progressives. And so just like you can't take over a corporation and vote out the leadership there, I mean, you can't do the same inside the Democratic Party. And so that's how it is. The chokehold is at the primary level, is preventing any progressives from making it through the primary. And when you think of this from the perspective of the oligarchs, the people who, as you pointed out, fund both parties. I mean, it's often the same billionaires, it's the same corporations that fund both parties. And so every year they bet on both horses and they never lose, So
what would you say to somebody, because we all see the same arguments all the time. Yeah. What do you say to somebody who's like, well, you got to start at the local level, man. You got to start like at the local level. You got to just get these progressives at the base level, infiltrating the Democratic Party, and that's how you got to do it. You got to go from the ground up. What do you say to that person?
I would say that the assumption that they're operating from, and the one that I would like them to challenge, is the idea that those people who you're electing at the local level are going to remain as progressive as they were when you elected them. And so what I described is that the minute they enter that kind of conveyor belt of the Democratic Party, the minute they enter what is a private corporation of a party, that it begins to change their own perspectives. It forces them to make compromises, in order to achieve power inside that party. And so it's not a question of like, oh, we're going to slowly elect people at the local level and they're going to rise up, and we're going to build a bench of progressives. The Democratic Party is actively undermining how progressive those people are. And history tells us that it's not a question, again, of personal integrity. It's a question of systems and structural incentives to survive and certainly to rise in the Democratic Party. You have to begin to accept and compromise certain corporate principles, and so that's what I would say.
So why not just do that with a whole new party? Why not just do that exact thing you just described?
Yeah.
Hypothetical person we're both arguing with. Why not do that, but with a whole new party, with a whole new structure? Stephen wants to know, what are the steps Nick and his crew are taking to establish third-party efficiency right now and in the future?
Yeah. So there's a number of different things that can be done. First of all, one very important thing, this Chicago, and I guess more of a big picture first. And so kind of how we see this movement for a People's Party is that you have the corporate parties, the establishment parties, Democratic and Republican parties in this camp, and you have the independent left and working people who are screwed over by both parties in another camp next. And so I think our mission is to bring as many resources from that corporate camp and that establishment camp and pry them out of its orbit and bring them into the independent left camp. And so, for example, Tim Canova, bringing him over, bringing other people like him over. What other resources are there that have, propped up the Democratic Party and that could start a new party with us? Organized labor. And so I was in Chicago at the Labor Notes conference this past weekend, and I was actually very surprised. I expected to find that unions and rank and file members would be very defeated and kind of resigned to the need to work inside the Democratic Party, but rather I found that that we got cheers and claps everywhere that we spoke up, everywhere that we talked, and so. Organized labor, bringing organized labor and unions in particular out of the Democratic Party and the corporate party's orbit, bringing it into a new party. That's also what we're working on. At the same time that we're prying out prominent progressive candidates and
okay, I understand people need to make their own announcements, Nick, but we really want some names here. So I'm just going to randomly say a name, like just random, just kind of, and then blink twice if they're considering it. Already. Nina Turner. All right, there we go. It's
Nina Turner already supports us. Just look on, like I can tell you that Nina Turner. Look at her on Twitter. She's constantly tweeting us. Right. Anyone can see that.
How are you going to get? DC asked this question, and this goes into the question that was just asked. Then we got a question from Jeff here coming up. Yeah. How are you going to get ballot access in all 50 states?
Yeah. So ballot access is something that the two parties have thoroughly rigged against independent politics. And so that's why it takes substantial resources to be able to do it in all 50 states. What we can do right now is we can identify some of the states that are the most progressive, the most independent, and have workable ballot access laws, and we can get started there. And so for Colorado is one of those states, for example. And so Washington and Oregon, maybe Maine, that maybe those states as well, where all of those factors come together. And then by getting ballot access there this year and next, then we can elect candidates and get some early victories, which I think can propel us to more states. While at the same time, we're working on pulling people out of the Democratic Party that bring big resources, very much like the Republicans did with the Whigs, and also pulling out organized labor as well. And while continuing to make the case, the fact that we as a community, an independent, progressive community, are here tells candidates and it tells people that we're not alone, when they want to make that jump. And so when we told Tim Canova, come on, go independent, go independent, go independent, he knew that he wasn't jumping off a ship, essentially. When he was jumping off that ship, he wasn't jumping overboard into the ocean. He was jumping onto another ship, a support structure, volunteers, donors, and that's what it takes to really bring people over and to lay that precursor and foundation for a new party.
So, guys, we crashed over on Live Me, which is why I put my headphones in, which is no big deal. We're just going to keep going on the YouTube. Jeff wants to know if Bernie ran as an independent. Was Jeff, first of all, thank you so much for the Super Chat contribution. Very much appreciated. And Jeff wants to know if Bernie ran again as an independent, would people rise up and demand open primaries?
Well, if he ran as an independent, we wouldn't need open primaries because he would be in the general election automatically. And not just that, but he would attract a much larger cross-section of people. So as an independent, you can attract the 45% of Americans who are now independent, but he would also attract many of the people inside the Democratic Party. 52% of people who are Democrats right now, even though that number has crashed, the number of people who affiliate with the Democratic Party, but 52% of them say that they want a major new party and that they're only in the Democratic Party because they feel like they have no choice. So he would attract those people, like he did during the Bernie campaign. He would attract conservatives as well. In Vermont, Bernie's more popular with conservatives than the Republican politicians are. And so if he ran as an independent, it would be his way of building that grand coalition, in similar to the way that he did in 2016, actually. In 2016, he was not perceived as a Democrat. He was perceived as an independent. And that was the core of his authentic image that allowed him as a candidate with 3% name recognition, no money, completely against the media, facing a hostile anointed candidate in the Democratic Party. That allowed him, the fact that he was seen as an independent, that allowed him to get 13 million votes, raise $250 million. And so I'm concerned that what people are saying that they want right now is that they want an independent. They want a new party. And at the core of Bernie's appeal was his independence. And if Bernie gets too close to the Democratic Party, I feel like it undermines the core of that appeal and that wellspring of Bernie's appeal that allowed him to go from virtually unknown, unfunded, completely opposed by every appendage of the establishment, to the party needing to cheat in order to block him in the Democratic primary.
All right. Now, I don't know if it's fair to call Hillary Clinton hostile. I'm sure she's very pleasant to people that are cutting her a check. But Balthazar wants to know, and this is more, I mean, people have a lot of questions about Bernie, and this is another one. Once the DNC screws him over, will you accept Bernie if he wants to run as a third party, or will you accept him with conditions or not at all? Uh-oh. Nick, you there? Uh-oh. I think we might have lost Nick, guys. I think we might have lost Nick.
There we go. I see.
Oh, there you go. You're back. Yay. Yeah. Okay. Are you there?
Yeah, and I heard the question. Will we accept Bernie if he changes his mind?
Okay. Yeah. Basically, yeah. Go for it.
Well, no doubt. The Democrat, if Bernie had left when we invited him at the Convergence Conference, Ron, the Democratic Party would have collapsed, and we would be building a major third party right now. The Democratic Party, for the past 15 years, tens of millions of people have left the Democratic and Republican parties. Their affiliation has sunk from about 35% to 27% of Americans. All of those people have gone independent. So one of the things that amazes us most is the fact that after the election of 2016, you have Bernie Sanders, the most popular politician in the country, calling for people to join the Democratic Party. You have Donald Trump and his daily assault on working people, and being the incredibly offensive person that he is too. So you would expect that there is this surge into the Democratic Party, really, with Bernie and Trump. But what you see is the opposite. Is people are actually leaving the Democratic Party, and that's continuing. Its affiliation is falling still. And so we think, if Bernie and Trump cannot reverse that tide of people going independent and people calling for a major new party, if in fact it is accelerating now, Why are we as a progressive community fighting that trend? Why are we plugging the holes in the sinking Titanic? Why don't we embrace that instead? Instead of going against what the majority of Americans are telling us, what working people are telling us in that independent trend, that's something that we should celebrate, because it means that people have seen through the duopoly. They've seen through the sham of the two-party system, and they want something new. And I think our role as progressives is to give that an expression. And I hope that Bernie will decide to do it eventually, and we would certainly accept his invitation. I think that the fact that Bernie is still in the Democratic Party is the only thing that is keeping it alive now.
I agree with you. Now, another structural question here that Watson wants to know, as far as personalities go, would you consider having Jill Stein if she were to maybe bring some of the Greens over?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So our whole philosophy is premised on building coalitions on the independent left, because that is how it is successfully done in other countries. Now they have parliamentary systems, obviously, but they still offer lessons to us. So in Spain, in France, in Greece, in Chile, there have just in the past few years, very established parties in the establishment part of those countries have by democratic socialist parties. And so absolutely building coalitions is the way to go, even though it's not as clear because we're not in a parliamentary system. And the other thing is that the establishment, corporations, they collaborate against us all the time. They collaborate against working people all the time. And that's what ALEC is, the American Legislative Exchange Council. That's what the Chamber of Commerce is. That's what industry lobbying groups are. That's what the Democratic and Republican parties are.
I mean, the DCCC is basically like, where's your money? You have to give it to all our friends, or you're not getting our resources. And I'm just saying, when are we just going to say, well, fuck your resources? Fuck your resources. Exactly. That is basically just funding the pockets of your friends that are in dying mediums anyway. You have to spend your money on our friends' newspaper. Well, fuck your friend's newspaper. Nobody reads it anymore, mainly because they just print your parroted bullshit. So, and they give us some coupons. Piss off. We don't want it anymore. We don't want it anymore. I mean, I think that's what people need to say. So this is my question. During the 2016 election, it was before I was with Jimmy, and or at least, well, I was on the show occasionally, but I wasn't with Jimmy on a full-time basis. But so I was touring a lot of colleges, and I saw the same thing. Judah Friedlander, who was also touring a lot of colleges at the time, he saw the same thing. I don't know anybody that can't vouch for this. On college campuses, we saw about 95% excitement for Bernie. A little bit of excitement for Jill Stein. There's actually a lot of Greens on college campuses. There's a lot of young Greens these days. And then, maybe a handful of people that were kind of into Trump, maybe because their parents were, maybe because they come from money, whatever the reason may be. I did not meet one college student, not one, excited about Hillary Clinton. DSA chapters are kind of thriving. So my question is, do you have any kind of ground game in that world, in the college world, to kind of motivate these young people? I mean, more and more young people, as you know, and you probably have better statistics off the top of your head than I do, more and more young people, they're not identifying with the Democratic Party. They're identifying as independent. On the same note, they're very left-leaning. And I think what Parkland has showed us, they're very motivated and they're very mobilized. When people shit on this young generation, I think that is so grossly misguided. Because I think, and I know we're around the same age, Nick. I know that we were very politically charged because of Iraq. And then I think because we had this smooth-talking guy in the White House for 8 years, people kind of got a little tired. And maybe generally, of course, everybody's different, but generally, maybe weren't quite as engaged. And now I think people are hyper awake. What are your thoughts on that?
I think so too. I'll share some of those statistics that you mentioned first. And so 71% of millennials are calling for a major new party. During the election of 2016, it was 91% of people under 29 who wanted a major third party alternative. And so that's almost unanimous. And the younger you get, the more progressive that you are and the more hostile you are towards the two parties. And so those are polls of millennials. But now Generation Z is beginning to vote. You know, those are the Parkland survivors. And they are even more hostile towards the Democratic and Republican parties. And that is the future. And another thing that shows also, another thing that's very telling is that millennials and Generation Z favor socialism over capitalism. And the same trend holds. The younger you get, the more you favor socialism over capitalism. And so that really is that is the direction. You know, there is the makings of a new society in younger generations now. And the tension that we see is over what younger generations want and what older generations as well, who've turned against the political establishment, this economy, versus the established entrenched institutions and centers of power. It's that tension, you know, over this tremendous mismatch over what people are looking for, particularly young people, and power institutions right now, particularly electorally. So what we need to do personally, you know, as MPP is, yes, you know, we are establishing chapters on campus, like on South Florida. In South Florida, we've built a couple now. I think we have a long way to go. You know,
why not coalesce with the DSA in this regard? Yeah. I mean, I know the DSA, we share a lot of the same principles. They're really connecting on college campuses. I think it's because mainly it's a catchy title, the Democratic Socialists of America. People associate that with Bernie. They kind of go to it. There's some DSA members that are winning seats locally, which is a good thing. Why not kind of coalesce with them on the ground?
Well, we are. So in DSA in particular, DSA for a long time was an organization kind of like PDA, DFA, in that it was very much in the Democratic Party's orbit for a long time. But it has, in the past couple of years, received this tremendous infusion of young energy. You know, DSA's average age used to be like 65, you know, until a couple of years ago. Now it's like 30, you know, now it's all young people. And so those young people hold a different vision of where we should go than a lot of the older folks and the folks who've been inside DSA for a long time. And so I think that's the dynamic at DSA. They are much more in favor of, you know, radical strategies, radical politics. And so there is we are working with a caucus inside DSA, the DSA Refoundation Caucus, which was founded last year. And the aim of that caucus is specifically for DSA to turn to independent politics, to get out of the Democratic Party's orbit, and to instead now begin supporting independent candidates and launch its own party. Not as DSA alone, but to work in collaboration with other groups to do that on the independent left. And so that's exactly what we're doing. You know, that's our mission, and we're working with them to encourage that. And so that is kind of part of the process is, you know, even within these organizations, DSA, Our Revolution, you know, it's kind of easy and tempting to maybe try to classify them as monoliths, like, oh, that one's totally in the Democrats, that one's, you know, totally in independent politics. But within each of those organizations, there's a struggle happening there too, that playing out, you know, where some of the staff, and this includes Our Revolution, some of the staff, you know, would prefer an independent direction. You know, some of the board would prefer an independent direction. And so that is playing out in DSA as well, a number of these organizations. And I think that's where we, as the Movement for a People's Party, as the organization that is solidly there, that is encouraging the members, you know, and the leadership of those organizations to say, you know, yes, it's time. Let's go with the people. It's not, you know, we're here racking our heads about how is it that we turn out young people? How is it that we that we inspire, you know, people of color to come out and to vote? How is it that we revive these horrible turnout rates in the United States? And it's really, what we're saying is that it's not rocket science. It's not as complicated as some Democrats and some progressives have made it out to be, because working people are telling us what they want. They want an independent alternative. They want independent politics. You know,
So
there is
that being said,
inexorable move there.
Let's jump, because we're almost out of time, and we're not going to get to everyone's question, but I'm going to try to get to
Sure.
as much as I can. Some people are asking some questions about the platform of Movement for a People's Party itself. Some people have asked some specific questions, but I'm going to try to just bottle it all up, throw it to you and say, just give a quick 2-minute Cliff Notes. This is the platform of the People's Party.
Yeah, so our platform is on our website, by the way, forapeoplesparty.org, and go to About and Platform. So you can read the whole thing there. But we have 24 planks. It's very comprehensive. We cover all of the basics: Medicare for all, single payer, getting money out of politics, dismantling the prison, school to prison pipeline, really dismantling the U.S. empire and reinvesting that 53% of discretionary spending that we spend on the military now, the peace dividends, finally. As well, and so I encourage people to go, because I can't describe it all in 2 minutes, but at the same time, some of the things that set it apart is that we go above and beyond that. We talk about public banking and supporting that as well. We talk about the impact that technology is having, and the way that really we have the technology and the resources at this point as a country and as a planet to satisfy everybody's needs: food, water, shelter, clothing, housing, education, all of those things which were included in Franklin Roosevelt's second Bill of Rights. That is something which we place very prominently. We believe that a second Bill of Economic Rights is something we need. It was possible 80 years ago. We had the resources and technology to do it when Roosevelt proposed it in 1932 and 1944, and it's so eminently possible right now. And the last thing I'll say about the platform is that we noticed that basically every organization and collection of human beings has a mission statement, whether it's a nonprofit or a book club or a sports team or a corporation, but our country doesn't. Our country doesn't have a mission statement, and that's insane. And so we established the mission statement of America. We created an American mission statement that is the purpose of our society and the purpose of our government is to maximize human well-being. You have to set that before you can say, we need single payer, we need public college, we need any of these things. First, you have to determine the purpose of society is maximizing human well-being.
So Matt Orfalia, friend of yours and mine, wants to know, what were your thoughts of Chris Hughes' talk at Politics and Prose about a guaranteed income?
Ah, okay.
Very, very cool spot, by the way, Politics and Prose. I love that spot. Whenever I'm in town, I try to get there.
Awesome spot in DC. You'll have to come talk one of these days at one of them. But I think the idea is great. The universal basic income, it really is the way of the future. And it is something that we have featured in our platform as well: universal basic income and a job guarantee. The ideas are not mutually exclusive. Some people think they are, but they actually go hand in hand. And part of the reason why it's so important and why it is the way of the future is automation. And so in 1820, 80% of of the American workforce was employed in agriculture. Now it's 2%. And the result is because we have invented much greater technology that allows a much smaller proportion of people to provide for everyone agriculturally. The same process has happened in manufacturing, where instead of having an assembly line of workers there, you now have 1 or 2 people overseeing an assembly line of robots. And now automation is hitting the service sector. And so it has swept through the agricultural sector. It has swept through the industrial sector, manufacturing. And now, once it goes through the service sector, Today, 80% of people are employed in the service sector in the United States. And so as you begin getting things like touch checkout, automated checkouts at supermarkets, you know, when you get automated kind of machines at airports as well, that process is going to continue to the point where there are going to be tens of millions of people who are not just unemployed, but they're unemployable. There's nowhere for them to go. And so that necessitates that when you have, you know, what studies are predicting now, that 50% of people of the US workforce is going to be unemployed in the next 10, 15 years. When you have that level of unemployment, what you have to do in order to provide for people's basic necessities is you have to decouple the idea of income and work. You know, you have to say instead, people are going to receive income irrespective of work, or the nature of the work is going to change. You know, it's going to be more volunteer oriented and that kind of thing, but it won't be provided for by the market when you start automating the service sector. And so the best way to do that is with a universal basic income, you know, to say that everybody deserves, as a human right, a basic level of income. We have the ability to do it now. Why wouldn't we?
Well, less bomb money. That's why. But all right, Nick, we got to wrap up here. Thank you so much for doing this. Use these last couple minutes to please plug away what people can do, where they can learn more.
Totally. And so find us at For a People's Party. What we're doing now is we're building chapters across the country, and we have tons of different volunteer openings. And so we would love to have you come join us on our volunteer form on the website. You can come and you can check off whether you want to contribute, whether it's in helping us coalition build, whether it's field organizing, whether it's graphic design, whether it's videography, anything you want to do, come let us know. We would love to have you with us. I think building a major new party is going to be the ultimate solution, is ultimately going to be where we go. And there's a whole series of events that are going to make it all the more clear. Bernie getting robbed of the primary again in 2020, another recession that the Democrats, you know, where the Democrats bail out the banks and where they participate in. And so come join us, be a part of building this new revolutionary party that is genuinely progressive.
There you go. And real quick, man, I got to ask, do you have an official theme song yet? Is there an official theme song of the movement?
No, we're taking recommendations.
All right. Well, I'm going to, I mean, I can't, I have a song. You might like it. You might not. I'll send it over to you. I haven't finished the proper recording of it yet, but I have a song called Time for Revolution. I think it's a fun one. It's kind of in the theme. So I'll have to send it your way. Just, you know, be kind. I'm fragile. I'm not, but, you know. Nick, thank you so much for doing this. Shout out that website one more time.
It's forapeoplesparty.org.
And it's the number 4, right? Or is it?
It's spelled out, actually.
Oh, it is spelled out. Okay. Okay. It is spelled out. Okay. forapeoplesparty.org. Do it. Go there. Guys, this has been Get Your News On with Ron, the world's first viewer-curated streaming news show. We will be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. You know the drill. We do this every Tuesday through Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Want to support this show? Patreon.com/Ron Placone. Pay what you can level. You get all kinds of exclusive content. You get free tickets to any of my shows whenever I'm in your town, or if you're in my town, however it works out. Thank you guys so much for being part of this. Thank you once again for your excellent questions. And Nick, thank you so much for all the work that you do and for joining us today.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks, everyone.
All right. See you guys tomorrow.
Adios.